morning of my daughter's 10th birthday, my husband handed me a manila envelope and said, "I think it's time we both moved on." The cake was still in the oven. I could smell the vanilla. I took the envelope, set it on the counter next to the mixing bowl, opened it slowly, like I wasn't in a hurry, like my hands weren't shaking. Inside was a divorce agreement, printed clean, already notarized on his end. He'd had it prepared. While I was ordering pink buttercream flowers from the bakery down the street, he was sitting across a desk from an attorney. The terms were what you'd expect. He'd keep the house because his name was on the mortgage. I'd get a fair settlement, $60,000 and whatever furniture I wanted. He'd take primary custody of our daughter because he had the income and the stability. I would get her every other weekend in alternating holidays. I read it twice. Then I looked up at him and said, "Okay." He blinked. "Okay? I'll sign it." I could see him recalibrating. He'd prepared for crying, maybe for screaming. He hadn't prepared for this. What he didn't know, what I hadn't told a single person yet, was that I had been waiting for this moment for almost 2 years. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was 32 years old, standing in a kitchen that smelled like birthday cake, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt something close to relief. My husband and I had met when I was 24. He was charming, the way certain men are charming. Effortlessly, selectively in the ways that counted most early on. He remembered the names of my friends. He asked follow-up questions. He made me feel, for the first time, like someone was actually paying attention. I was a pediatric nurse when we got married. I liked my work. I was good at it. 18 months into our marriage, he sat me down and made what he called a practical case. His salary had grown. My hours were long. If we were going to start a family, it made sense for one of us to be home. He said it gently, reasonably, the way he said most things that were ultimately about control. I left nursing. I told myself it was temporary. Our daughter was born 9 months later. She was small and loud and perfect, and I fell so completely in love with her that I stopped noticing, for a while, how much of myself I'd set aside. By the time she was 7, I had noticed. By the time she was 8, I had started paying attention to things I'd trained myself not to see. The phone left face down on every surface. The business trips that didn't quite line up. The way he'd walk into a room still smiling from some private conversation and let the smile drop the moment he saw it. Was only me. I didn't confront him. I'd learned enough by then to know that confrontation, without preparation, only puts you at a disadvantage. Instead, I started making plans. The first thing I did was call my old nursing supervisor, a woman I'd kept in loose touch with over the years. I told her I was thinking about coming back. She told me the field had shifted, that I'd need to recertify, and that it would take time. I said I had time. I started studying after my daughter was asleep. 11 p.m., midnight, sometimes later, with the kitchen light on and the house quiet and my textbook spread across the table where we used to eat breakfast together as a family. Before he started taking his coffee in the car, he never noticed. In his mind, I was still the woman who needed him to explain the cable bill. The second thing I did was open a bank account in my name only. I'd read somewhere, in one of the forums I'd started visiting quietly, on private browsing, that this was the first thing you do. I transferred small amounts when I could. $20 here, $40 there. Birthday money from my mother. A little from the grocery budget when I bought the store brand and didn't mention it. By month 18, I had a little over $4,000. Not much, but mine. The third thing I did was call an attorney. Her name was Ms. Boss. She was in her 50s, practical, and she didn't waste time feeling sorry for me, which was exactly what I needed. She told me what I needed to know about asset division in our state. She told me what mattered in custody hearings. She told me to document everything I could, not obsessively, but consistently. Dates, amounts, patterns, I documented. 6 weeks before my daughter's birthday, I got my recertification results in the mail. I passed, not barely. I scored in the 91st percentile. I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside because I knew if I walked in right then, I'd be smiling in a way I couldn't explain. 2 weeks after that, I signed an employment contract with a regional hospital, 40 minutes from our house. Full-time pediatric ward. The starting salary was $78,000 a year. I told no one. The week before the birthday party, Ms. Voss called me to say that the financial investigator she'd referred me to had found something. My husband had quietly transferred a rental property, a small duplex he purchased 6 years ago, before we were married, but during our engagement, into an LLC registered to his college roommate. On paper, he no longer owned it. In practice, the rental income still flowed through accounts we shared. It was the kind of thing that looks accidental until you look closely. Boss said, "This changes the math significantly." I said, "I know." So when he handed me that envelope on the morning of our daughter's 10th birthday, with the vanilla still warm in the air, I took it and said okay because I had already spent 22 months building the floor I was standing on. He thought he was offering me an exit. He didn't understand that I had already found my own door. We got through the birthday party. I put on the same face I've been wearing for years, attentive, pleasant, fine. My daughter wore a crown made of paper and foil, and she ate 2 slices of cake and laughed until she hiccuped. And I held on to every second of it because I knew things were about to change, and I needed that memory to be clean. That night, after she was asleep, he knocked on the guest room door. I'd been sleeping in the guest room for almost a year. He said it was because of his insomnia. I let him say that. "I just want to make sure you understand the terms," he said, standing in the doorway. "The settlement is more than fair. You'd be comfortable." "I understand the terms," I said. "And you're okay?" I looked at him for a moment. He was asking because my calm was making him uneasy. Men like him expect a reaction. The reaction is how they maintain control. They manage your emotions, and through your emotions, they manage you. If you stop reacting, they lose their footing. "I'm fine," I said. "Get some sleep." He stood there another moment, then left. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and opened my phone to a message from Ms. Voss. "Everything's ready. Say the word." I typed back, "Monday." I told my parents on Sunday afternoon. My mother cried before I finished the first sentence. My father went very still in the way he does when he's holding something in. I told them the same things I told myself for 2 years. That staying would have cost me more than leaving. That I had a plan. That I had a job, a lawyer, and enough documentation to reopen every financial question my husband thought was already settled. My father asked about my daughter. His voice was careful. "The agreement gives him primary custody," I said. "I signed it." My mother's face did something I hadn't seen before. "Mom," I said, "listen to me. If I'd fought for custody right now, with no income on paper, no established residence, and him having a 3-bedroom house and a 6-figure salary, I would have lost. The judge would have looked at the numbers and ruled against me. I know this because Ms. Voss told me, and she has done this for 20 years. I paused. Temporary custody is not permanent custody. I have 60 days from the date of the final decree to file for modification based on changed circumstances. I start work in 2 weeks. I'm signing a lease on an apartment near her school on Tuesday. By the time 60 days are up, my circumstances will be very different." My father looked at his hands. Then he nodded. "You thought this through," he said. "I've had a lot of late nights." My mother wiped her eyes and reached across the table and took my hand, and didn't let go for a long time. Monday morning, I met my husband in the kitchen at 7 a.m. He was making coffee. My daughter was still asleep. I was dressed in the gray blazer I'd bought 2 months ago and hung in the back of the closet. He looked at me. "You look different." "I have a meeting," I said. "With who?" "My attorney." Something moved across his face. "I thought you agreed to the terms." "I agreed to discuss them," I said. "There's a difference." He set down his coffee mug. "Kate, I don't want this to get complicated." I didn't correct him on the name. He'd been calling me the wrong thing in his head for a long time, I think. I just picked up my bag and said, "It won't be complicated if you cooperate." "Miss Ken." Boss and I met the financial investigator at her office at 9. He walked us through everything: the duplex, the LLC, the rental income that had been quietly accumulating in an account my husband controlled alone. The fact that in our state, property purchased during an engagement is considered marital property if marital funds were ever used to maintain it, and they had been. I had the receipts. I had saved every home improvement invoice, every utility bill, every repair cost my husband had ever paid me back for, from the wrong account, as he used to say. I hadn't known why I kept them. I just knew they felt important. The duplex had appreciated significantly. Combined with the rental income, the hidden asset was worth just under $900,000. Ms. Voss looked at me across the table. "This is not a $60,000 settlement." "No," I said. It isn't. My husband didn't know any of this when he showed up to the mediation session 2 days later. He'd brought his own attorney, a man in his 60s who looked like he'd done this 100 times and expected it to go the same way it always did. It didn't. When Ms. Prep didn't, Voss placed the property records, the LLC documentation, and the financial timeline on the table. My husband's attorney went quiet in a way that said he was recalculating. My husband's face went a color I'd never seen before. "You can't," he started. "The duplex is marital property under state law," Ms. Voss said. She didn't raise her voice. She'd been doing this long enough not to need to. "Your client used joint funds for maintenance and repairs in tax years 2019, 2020, 2020, and 2022. We have documentation for all 4 years. We're also prepared to subpoena the LLC's banking records if necessary." My husband looked at me. Not his attorney. Me. "You did this," he said. Not a question. "I protected myself," I said. "There's a difference." His attorney put a hand on his arm and leaned in to speak quietly. I watched my husband's expression shift from shock to calculation to something that looked finally like defeat. The revised agreement took 2 hours to negotiate. I would receive half the current value of the duplex, $430,000, plus 4 years of documented rental income he'd controlled without my knowledge. The house, which I didn't want anyway, stayed with him. I got a fair division of our liquid assets. Child support was set at an amount that reflected his actual income, not the number he'd offered in the original agreement. Custody remained as written, temporarily. We both knew I'd be back in 60 days. When he signed, he didn't look at me. I looked at him. I wanted to remember what this felt like. Not out of cruelty, but because I had spent 2 years in a house where I was invisible, and I needed to remember that visibility was possible. That I was capable of it. I moved into my apartment on a Saturday. It was a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building 6 minutes from my daughter's school. The 2nd bedroom had a window that faced east, and I put a small desk in the corner for her homework and a reading lamp she'd picked out herself. Yellow, shaped like a giraffe, which she'd loved since she was 4. She spent her first weekend with me 2 weeks after I moved in. She walked into her room and stood very still for a moment, and I held my breath, and then she turned around and hugged me so hard I had to take a step back. "You kept the giraffe lamp," she said. "Of course I did. We made pancakes that morning." She told me about a fight with her best friend at school, something about a misunderstanding at recess, the kind of crisis that is enormous when you're 10. I sat across from her and listened with my whole self in a way I hadn't been able to in years. No half attention, no part of me braced for the sound of the front door. That night, after she was asleep, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea. The city was quiet. My phone showed a message from my first day back at the hospital, a thank you from a parent whose kid I'd helped settle down for a blood draw. "She talked about you the whole way home," the message said. "You have a gift." I hadn't heard that about myself in a long time. I went back inside, checked the lock, turned off the lights, and got into bed in my own apartment in my own name, with a job I was good at and a daughter who knew where to find me. 58 days after the final divorce decree, Ms. Voss filed the custody modification. I had 2 months of pay stubs, a signed lease, a letter from my supervisor, documented school pickup records, character references from my daughter's teacher and a neighbor who'd watched her twice when I'd had a late shift and my ex hadn't been available. My ex's attorney filed the counter-argument, but it was thin. He'd relocated 30 minutes further from my daughter's school to move in with someone I recognized from the photos, a woman he'd been seeing, I later confirmed, for almost 3 years. The judge read everything carefully. She asked my daughter, in a private session, just the 2 of them and a court-appointed child advocate, where she wanted to live. My daughter told the truth. She was 10. She'd always been braver than either of us gave her credit for. Primary custody was transferred to me 6 weeks later. My ex retained generous visitation. Every other weekend, alternating holidays, 2 weeks in the summer. He showed up consistently, and I gave him that because whatever he'd done to me, he was still her father and she deserved to know him. On the first night, my daughter slept in her own room in my apartment. Not a visit, but home. She padded into the kitchen at 7 in the morning and asked if we could make waffles. We made waffles. She burned the first one. We laughed about it for 10 minutes. She said it looked like a map of somewhere important and taped it to the refrigerator. And I let her, because joy is strange and specific and you don't argue with it. People ask me sometimes, Women in the forums, women at work. How I stayed so calm through all of it. How I stayed so calm through all of it. How I didn't fall apart. The honest answer is that I did fall apart. Just not in front of him. I fell apart in my car, in parking lots at 11 o'clock at night over a textbook I wasn't sure I could finish. I cried more nights than I didn't. I was terrified every single day for almost 2 years. But I had learned something. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, that fear and forward motion are not opposites. You can be afraid and still take the next step. You can be heartbroken and still pass the exam. You can love someone who has stopped seeing you and still, finally, see yourself. The morning he handed me that envelope, I wasn't calm because I didn't care. I was calm because I had already done the work. Because I had stayed up late and asked hard questions and made phone calls I didn't know how to make, and saved money from the grocery budget and kept receipts in a folder at the back of my filing cabinet for 2 years just in case. It wasn't luck. It wasn't revenge, exactly. It was just preparation. It was me deciding that if this day came, I would not be caught without a floor to stand on. The cake was still warm when I signed his envelope. I had a better agreement waiting in my own.